views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Get ready for a game changer. Sarah Westall is bringing you Business Game Changers Radio. Mondays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, Sarah will bring you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Now here's your host, Sarah Westall.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall, and you're listening to Conscious Business Radio on the Transformation Talk Radio Network. We are going to talk about war for profit, an inside look at the military-industrial complex. We are going to talk with Mr. Hartung, William Hartung. He has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other publications. He has also written the book Profits of War, Lockheed Martin and the Making of the Military-Industrial Complex, Lessons from Iraq, Avoiding the Next War, and How Much Are You Making on the War, Daddy? He also appeared in several documentaries on this. And we are going to talk about the where the money is behind the military-industrial complex, who's getting the money, how much is going towards the military. It's not just the Pentagon budget. There's many different areas of the government's budget that actually goes into the military. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about who the biggest players are and how much money is being spent into the black budget. It's hard to know because it's black, but we're going to dive into those and see what's going on there and what we can do to rein in the spending. I mean, we all want a strong national defense, right? I mean, we need that. We need to protect ourselves as a country. But do we need the many, many bases that we have all over the world? I actually think we spend more on international funding or spending on the military all over the world than we do on national defense. National defense is our top priority, but I think we're spending it for different reasons. And people are wondering what's really going on. I think we'd actually be safer if we spent less internationally. And I think that goes without being debated, being honest. I mean, you can debate different specifics of it, but the amount of money you spend on offense instead of defense makes you less safe. And we spend a lot on offense. And offense is something that you need to really question on whether that's the right thing for our country or not. So we are going to talk to William Hartung, and he right now is the director of the Arms and Security Project at the Center for International Policy. And he's going to join us to talk about this and give us some insights on where all this money is spent. So let's welcome William Hartung to the program.
Hi, Bill. Welcome to the program.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I want to get right into this. I read a quote, and I think a lot of people have, about Eisenhower, and it's kind of the famous thing that people bring up when they talk about the military-industrial complex. But, Dwight Eisenhower, in his farewell address, January 1961, he warned about an immense military establishment and a large arms industry had emerged as a hidden force in U.S. politics, and that Americans must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. How would you say we're different today from back then? Because my understanding is, I've been doing a lot of research. I was almost overwhelmed with how big we are now. Are we substantially bigger than back then?
Yes. The Pentagon budget is about twice what it was when Eisenhower gave his speech, adjusting for inflation. And we have large companies like Lockheed Martin that themselves get $35 or $40 billion a year from the Pentagon and are larger than the operating budget of the State Department for just one company, and also do a lot of other government contracting intelligence and IRS and census and FBI. So there's kind of these all-purpose government contracting firms that they do surveillance that really didn't exist in that form in Eisenhower's day. So there's more money flowing. The companies are larger, and they have probably more levers of influence than they had then. The one difference is that our economy has grown dramatically. So the Pentagon is not as big a share of the GDP, but it's still a very powerful lobby.
But in today's dollars, where it's about twice the size of the budget.
Yes.
And when I was, doing research on all this stuff, and I have been for a while, the military, the Pentagon is just part of the military now, right? I mean, because there's so many different departments, like, the FBI. Is this all considered part of the Pentagon? FBI, the CIA, the NSA, Homeland Security, even NASA gets involved in this stuff. There's 16 different spy agencies. Is that in the government budget? Is that considered part of the Pentagon, or is it a lot of these things not part of the Pentagon budget?
They're almost all separate departments or line items. So the Pentagon gets $500 billion a year for its base budget, $50 billion in addition for its war budget. Then nuclear warheads are at the Department of Energy. You have intelligence, as you said, and Homeland Security. And so if you look at all the other military-related items, including taking care of our vets, it goes to more like $1 trillion. So it's a huge investment in all sorts of military-related activities, only about half of which is located at the Pentagon.
And so when they talk about the Pentagon, they talk about the military budget. Do they kind of fudge things by just talking about the Pentagon's budget so it seems like it's a lot smaller?
I think so. Yeah, I think if people knew the full range of military activities, they'd be, holding onto their wallets a bit. They'd be probably shocked to realize how much that is. And a lot of it is things that used to be military functions. I mean, protecting the borders was traditionally the Pentagon, military's job. Now that's Homeland Security.
Well, is that a way to increase the Pentagon's budget? In a way, you just start creating all these other agencies and you spin it out of the Pentagon. And then so the Pentagon's budget really is bigger because you're taking those kinds of items and putting in these other agencies. And so they don't have to be, from a budget standpoint, they don't have to look like it's part of the Pentagon's budget.
Well, I mean, the Pentagon, it has a little less bureaucratic control over these other departments, but certainly in terms of Eisenhower's description of the military-industrial complex, the same companies contract with Homeland Security, with the intelligence agencies, with the FBI and so forth, as contract with the Pentagon. So on the corporate side, it's a pretty uniform, complex of organizations. And then on the government side, there are some, bureaucratic skirmishes and such. So it's not exactly like the Pentagon controlling all that, but it's certainly all for military purposes.
Well, yeah, maybe not the Pentagon, but the military-industrial complex controls it. I mean, the Pentagon's just one part of the military-industrial complex.
That's right.
So they're almost, when you look at it like that, they're almost as large as what percentage of our total budget is the military-industrial complex?
Well, at $1 trillion, it's probably 35 to 40% of the whole budget. And that includes Medicare and Social Security. So it's the entire federal expenditure. So that's a very substantial amount at a time when we're scraping to invest in infrastructure and reform education, do all the other things that we want to do, pay to clean up environmental disasters. So it really puts a crimp in the rest of the things that we can invest in.
Well, do you think maybe it even could be bigger than that when you start looking at some of the black budget issues? I was reading an article, and this is really known out there, that there was $1.3 trillion that were missing. Even Donald Rumsfeld was talking about that. And then from the HUD, they have $50 billion a year that is just missing, and they think it's going towards black budget stuff. And so could it be bigger than we realize?
Yes. I mean, there's some discussion whether they, the intelligence budget is, sort of hidden in the Pentagon budget, so it fits under that $500 billion, or whether it's completely separate. But the fact is we don't know. I mean, they have said that all those intelligence agencies together spend about $80 billion. But since they don't release any detailed budget figures, we don't really have a way of checking that.
Well, and every time there's like the HUD, when they're missing they think that HUD money is being funneled back into these military things. But every time they go to audit or review numbers, they say that it's unauditable. Yes,
the Pentagon has never passed an audit. And it's not just they audited and there was a few things missing. It's like they can't audit them at all. And it's partly because they have, 22 separate computer systems, most of which don't talk to each other. It's partly just sloppiness. They've had fewer contract officers. They've been cutting back on those even as Pentagon spending has gone up. So the Pentagon doesn't seem to show a lot of motivation to make their books auditable because it would make them more accountable, and we'd start asking questions about some of the waste that's contained in that budget.
Well, from a computer system standpoint, their technology for their own programs is off the chart. We're far superior to every other country in the world. NSA is monitoring everything that we're doing, but yet their own computer systems can't talk to each other, and it's in the dark ages. Can't talk. So it's almost a laughable argument that they can't get their act together from a number standpoint, but yet all their other computer systems are great.
Yeah, it's question of priorities. I think there's a disincentive to be more accountable about their budget. I mean, they've got 1 million civilian employees. They think 700,000 private contractors, although they're not able to do a real count because they can't keep track of them all. So that's a gigantic bureaucracy. I mean, there's many more people in the bureaucracy than there are troops in uniform. So you got that huge overhang, and then the question is, what are all those people doing? And
exactly. Well, how could you possibly have that big of a budget, and what are you doing with it?
And I think with an audit, maybe it would become clearer that a lot of those functions are not necessary. But then the Pentagon would have less money and therefore less political clout.
Are you familiar with the law that allows the military contractors to be excluded from the SEC accounting rules for public companies?
No. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I was reading about – I was hoping you could educate us on this, but do you know who Catherine Austin Fitts is?
The name's familiar, but I don't know.
I was watching a conference that she was at, and she was talking about a new law that went into place in the early 2000s where the military contractors are not held up to the same accounting rules as all the other companies in our country by the SEC. And so they're the public military that are on the public stock exchange, they do not have to report, and so they just can falsify financial statements. So that's their way of, we have no idea what we're spending on them either.
So basically the government side is unaccountable and the corporate side. So it's
it makes sense. If you're going to make the private side accountable, you could probably backdoor figure out what the government's doing, I guess.
And to a significant extent, yeah.
And so they made it so now both sides are unaccountable. And so they actually made a law that they don't have to report that.
Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's unacceptable,
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I was, there was a very interesting, and I want to hear about this, and I know you know a lot about this, how weapons are sold to other countries around the world. I was watching they brought cameras into this convention. It was they were selling weapons to generals around the world, different military generals and different high-powered military people around the world, and, that are part of the different, military organizations. And it was like a car convention, except they were selling weapons. There were booths, and they were showing all these different, tanks and big military items. and they were selling it to generals, and it was very salesy, marketing oriented. And I thought that was very interesting. Have you had an experience of being able to go to any of these conventions or learn about these things?
Yes. I've been